When Tupac Shakur died on September 13, 1996, just 6 days after being shot in Las Vegas, the world mourned. Streets filled with candles, murals bloomed overnight in neighborhoods from LA to Brooklyn, and thousands of fans gathered in vigils across the country. But behind the scenes, a different atmosphere settled over the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. Confusion, hesitation, and, ultimately, silence. The investigation into Tupac's murder was, from the beginning, a fractured effort. In the hours immediately after the shooting, Las Vegas police struggled to get cooperation from witnesses. Suge Knight, who was driving the BMW and sustained a head wound during the attack, claimed he didn't see anything. Tupac, in his final hours, was sedated, intubated, and never regained consciousness to name a suspect. Others in his entourage who were riding nearby refused to speak in detail. Some of them even left town before police could follow up. A thick cloud of mistrust surrounded law enforcement, especially from people involved in the hip-hop scene. The streets, however, were buzzing with speculation. Within hours, Tupac's inner circle believed they knew who was responsible: Orlando "Baby Lane" Anderson, the young Southside Compton Crip, who had been assaulted by Tupac and his entourage just hours before the shooting at the MGM Grand. The entire fight had been captured on hotel surveillance video. It seemed like motive and opportunity had lined up perfectly, and yet no arrest was made. The primary suspect, Orlando Anderson, was interviewed by the police a few days after the murder. He denied involvement. No gun was found, no vehicle traced, and no one willing to testify that they saw him pull the trigger. Incredibly, he was allowed to walk free. Meanwhile, the media turned the case into spectacle. Talk of the East Coast versus West Coast rap. War dominated headlines. Tupac had long-standing beefs with the Notorious B.I.G., Bad Boy Records, and many artists out of New York. Just months earlier, Tupac had accused Biggie of being involved in a 1994 shooting that left him wounded at Quad Studios in Manhattan. "Who Shot Ya?" A song by Biggie was interpreted by many as a taunt. Tupac responded with a venomous track, "Hit 'Em Up," inflaming the feud to near unmanageable levels. The result was a narrative that took attention away from the true shooters and painted the murder as part of a rap rivalry instead of a targeted retaliation for a street gang conflict. The media pushed Biggie into the spotlight as a potential suspect, but law enforcement never produced any evidence linking him to the shooting. Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, detectives at the Compton Gang Unit were more certain. They believed the murder stemmed directly from the fight at the MGM Grand. Many of them knew who Orlando Anderson was. Some had run-ins with his uncle, Dwayne Keefe D. Davis, a higher-up in the Southside Compton Crips. But jurisdictional issues and a lack of interstate collaboration made it difficult for LAPD and Las Vegas PD to connect the dots. For a while, Orlando Anderson lived in the shadow of suspicion, but no formal charges were ever filed against him. In fact, in 1997, Anderson even filed a lawsuit against Death Row Records and Tupac's estate, claiming he was a victim of assault. The suit was later settled. Then, in a cruel twist of fate, Orlando Anderson was killed in a shootout in Compton in May 1998, just 2 years after Tupac's death. He was 23 years old. With Anderson gone, many felt the last clear suspect had vanished forever. The case, which had been cooling slowly, effectively went cold. Around the same time, another tragedy struck. The Notorious B.I.G., Christopher Wallace, was gunned down in Los Angeles on March 9, 1997, just 6 months after Tupac. Shot outside the Peterson Automotive Museum, Biggie's murder mirrored Tupac's in chilling fashion. Another young, black hip-hop superstar murdered in a drive-by, with no arrests made. The two cases became forever linked. 2 unsolved homicides, 2 shattered legends, and 1,000 theories. In the years that followed, conspiracy theories multiplied. Some believed the FBI was behind both murders. Others speculated that Suge Knight orchestrated Tupac's death to silence him, fearing he might leave Death Row Records. A few even claimed Tupac faked his death and fled to Cuba or Mexico. His lyrics, interviews, and cryptic final album, The Don Killuminati, the 7-Day Theory, released under the alias Machiavelli just 2 months after his death, were dissected for clues. Lines like, "I'm not dead, just sleeping," and "Expect me like you expect Jesus to come back" fueled speculation that he was alive. Through it all, the police offered no answers. The Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department came under increasing criticism for their handling of the case. No official suspects were ever publicly named. No physical evidence was presented to the public, and the longer the silence lasted, the more the myth of Tupac grew. By the early 2000s, several journalists and former detectives tried to revive interest in the case. Former LAPD Detective Greg Kading, who led an internal task force investigating both Tupac's and Biggie's murders, later claimed that Dwayne Keefe D. Davis had confessed in a taped interview that he was in the Cadillac on the night Tupac was shot and knew who pulled the trigger. But Kading's investigation never led to prosecution, and the confession was protected under a proffer agreement, meaning it couldn't be used against Davis in court. Tupac's mother, Tupac Shakur, continued to fight for justice through his estate. She sued Death Row Records for unpaid royalties and remained vocal in her criticism of the police. But by the time she passed away in 2016, her son's murder was still officially unsolved. For more than 2 decades, the case remained cold. The only people who truly knew what happened that night either refused to talk or were no longer alive. It would take Keefe D's own words, spoken years later, publicly and without immunity, to reopen the door. But that's a story for another time.